Now, Larry, where's your crystal ball?
I left it in Charlottesville. It's very precious.
Can you still?
We don't take a chance on dinging it.
Can you still help us without that assistance?
I'll try.
Okay. Now, why don't you playing off what our colleagues have said, can you talk a little about your sense of foreign policy and how that might be playing in November?
I don't think it'll play at all. Look, I believe in analyzing both presidential and midterm elections from, 30,000 feet. Actually, after last week, I don't think that's a safe place to be. But essentially, the higher you are looking down on the landscape of an election, the more likely you are to detect a general movement in one direction or another. The most interesting thing I thought in John's poll, the most revealing, as usual, was the generic ballot. Because I believe it was +2 Republican. It was +7, right, in your prior poll. And I think that's about right, and I think other surveys have been showing that too. The generic ballot's very important for midterm congressional elections because it tells you basically where the electorate is, not necessarily where it will be, but where it is. This is what, mid-July, so we have to be careful. But the long and short is, I'll tell you a couple observations that I think are important about these midterms, and it has nothing to do with foreign policy, and surprisingly little to do with most domestic policies. This election isn't where I thought it would be this time last year, or even for that matter, January. I didn't think this was going to be anything like 2010 because the Republicans had already scooped up, particularly in the House, what they were going to get. They lost a few of them in 2012, but it's not where I thought it was going to be. I thought it would be, since it was a sixth-year election, since President Obama was, in the low 40s, varies depending on the season, and some other factors, that this would be a predominantly, maybe a very good Republican year. Well, I think it's a mildly Republican year, at least in mid-July. Now, waves can be late. You could have them develop in September, late September and October. Sometimes they develop in August, as it did in 2010. We were the first to call the House for the Republicans by a wide margin, at least 40 seats in August, because the generic ballot was moving so strongly in the Republican direction, and there were other factors as well. Well, that's not happening. That's not happening. When you look, the House is over. Everybody knows, Republicans will probably pick up a few seats. It's going to stay Republican. Who cares? Governors, I think it's going to be basically a wash, plus, 2 in the Democratic direction, or maybe 0, change, net change. You'll have some incumbents defeated, and that'll be the headline. Everybody thinks that Western civilization collapsed, and in fact, the vast majority of incumbents will be reelected. It's the Senate that's revealing. And this is the best map for Republicans since 1980. They should run up a big margin based on the conditions that ought to be present in a sixth-year election. Ain't happening so far. It's just not happening. I can't see them gaining fewer than 4, so that'll be, for them, a mildly good year. I can see them gaining 5. I can see them gaining 6. And if you stretch me, I see they're not going to run up a margin big enough potentially to sustain a majority in 2016 if the presidential election turnout is at all as democratic as it has been in the last couple of elections. So that is my view from above. This is not as interesting a midterm election as I expected. It's not nearly as interesting as 2010. It's not nearly as interesting as 2006. And I'm sorry to say that I know I've said the wrong thing. But that's my view of it.